Hi kids, it's Aunt Molly. How is everybody? I'm getting kind of a late start to my storytelling today, but that is okay too. I had some stuff going on, so I had to take care of that. But now I'm here and Raggedy says hi. Um, so tonight, today I've been making soup, and it made me think when I was making the soup of my favorite soup as a kid and one of my favorite stories as a kid, but I couldn't find a good version online that I liked. So I finally got to this one. It's called Stone Soup, and it's from Sweden. Okay, so today we're going to hear a little bit of a folk tale, all right, about soup making, all right? Ready? Okay. Stone Soup. There once was a man who went plodding his way through a forest. The distance between the houses was so great that he had little hope of finding a shelter before the night set in. But all of a sudden he saw some lights between the trees. He then discovered a cottage where there was a fire burning on the hearth. How nice it would be to roast oneself before that fire and get a bite of something, he thought, and so he dragged himself towards the cottage. Just then an old woman came towards him. "Good evening," said the woman. "Where do you come from?" "South of the sun and east of the moon," said the man, "and now I'm on the way home again. For I have been all over the world with the exception of this parish," he said. "You must be a great traveler then," said the woman. "What might be your business here?" "Oh, I want shelter for the night." "I thought as much," said the woman, "but you may as well get on your way, for my husband is not home and my place is not an inn." She said. "My good woman," said the man, "you mustn't be so cross and hard-hearted, for we are both human beings and should help one another. It is written." "Help one another," said the woman. "Help? Did you ever hear such a thing? Who'll help me, do you think? I haven't got a morsel in the house." "No, you'll have to look for quarters elsewhere," she said. But the tramp was like the rest of his kind. The man, was like the rest of his kind. He did not consider himself beaten back at the first rebuff. He didn't take no for an answer, in other words. Although the woman grumbled and complained as much as she could, he was just as persistent as ever and went on begging and praying like a starved dog until at last she gave in and he got permission to lie on the floor for the night. That was very kind, he thought, and he thanked her for it. "Better on the floor without sleep than to suffer the cold in the forest deep," he said, for he was a merry fellow, this guy, and was always ready with a rhyme. When he came into the room, he could see that the woman was not so badly off as she had pretended, but she was a greedy and stingy woman of the worst sort, and was always complaining and grumbling. He now made himself very agreeable, of course, and asked her in his most insinuating manner for something to eat. "Where am I to get it from?" said the woman. "I haven't tasted a morsel myself the whole day." But the man was a cunning fellow. "Poor old granny, you must be starving," he said. Well, I suppose I'll have to ask you to have something with me then." "Have something with you?" said the woman. "You don't look as if you could ask anyone to have anything. What have you got to offer one, I would like to know?" "He who far and wide does roam sees many things not known at home, and he who many things has seen has wits about him and senses keen," said the tramp. "Better dead than lose one's head. Lend me a pot, granny," he said. The old woman now became very inquisitive, as you may guess, and so she let him have a pot. He filled it with water and put it on the fire, and then he blew with all his might until the fire was burning fiercely all around. Then he took a 4-inch stone from his pocket, turned it 3 times in his hand, and put it in the pot. The woman stared with all her might. "What is this going to be?" she said. "Stone soup," said the man. The old woman had seen and heard a good deal in her time, but that anybody could have made a broth with stone, well, she had never heard the like before. "That's something for poor people to know," she said, "and I should like to learn how to make it." That which is not worth having will always go a-begging," said the tramp. But if she wanted to learn how to make it, she only had to watch him, he said, and went on stirring the broth. The woman squatted to the ground, her hands clasping her knees and her eyes following his hand as he stirred the broth. "This generally makes very good broth," he said, "but this time it will very likely be rather thin, for I have been making broth the whole week with the same stone. If one only had a handful of sifted oatmeal to put in, that would make it all right," he said. "But what one has to go without, it's no use thinking about any more about, he said, and so he stirred the broth again. Well, I think I have a scrap of flour somewhere, said the woman, and went out to fetch some, and it was both good and fine. The man began putting the flour into the broth and went on stirring, while the woman sat staring now at him and then and then at the pot until her eyes nearly burst their sockets. This broth would be good enough for company, he said, putting in one handful of flour after the other. If I only had a bit of salted beef and a few potatoes to put in it, it would be fit for gentlefolks, however particular they might be, he said. But what one has to go without, it's no use thinking about. When the old woman really began to think it over, she thought she had some potatoes, maybe, and perhaps a bit of beef as well. And these she gave to the man, who went on stirring while she sat and stared as hard as ever. This will be grand enough for the best in the land, he said. Well, I never, said the woman, and just fancy, all with a stone. He really was a wonderful man, that guy. He could do more than drink a sup and turn the tankard up, he could. If one only had a little barley and a drop of milk, we could ask the king himself to have some of it, he said, for this is what he has blessed every evening that I know of, for I have been in the service under the king's cook, he said. Dear me, ask the king to have some? Well, I never, exclaimed the woman, slapping her knees. She was quite awestruck at the man and his grand connections. But what one has to go without, it's no use thinking more about, he said. The man went on stirring, and the woman sat staring one moment at him and the next at the pot. Then all at once the tramp took out the stone. Now it's ready, and we'll have a real good feast, he said. But to this kind of soup the king and the queen always take a dram or two, and one sandwich at least. And then they always have a cloth on the table when they eat, he said. But what one has to go without, it's no use thinking about, he said. But by this time the old woman herself had begun to feel quite grand and fine, I can tell you. And if that was all that was wanted to make it just as the king had it, she thought it would be nice to have it just the same way for once, and play at being king and queen with the man. She went straight to a cupboard and brought out brandy, glasses, butter and cheese, smoked beef and veal, until at last the table looked as if it were decked out for company. Never in her life had the old woman had such a grand feast, and never had she tasted such broth, and such fancy broth made only with a stone. She was in such good and merry humor after learning such an economical way of making broth that she did not know how to make enough of the man who had taught her such a useful thing. So they ate and drank and ate until they both became very tired and sleepy. The man was now going to lie down on the floor, but that would never do, thought the old woman. No, it was impossible. Such a grand person must have a bed to lie in, she said. He did not need much pressing. It's just like the sweet Christmas time, he said, and a nicer woman I never came across. Ah, well, happy are they who meet with such good people, he said, and lay down on the bed and went to sleep. And the next morning when he awoke, the first thing he got was coffee and a dram. When he was going, the old woman gave him a bright dollar piece. And thanks, many thanks for what you have taught me, she said. Now I shall live in comfort, since I've learned how to make broth with a stone. Well, it isn't very difficult if one only has something good to add to it, said the tramp as he went on his way. The woman stood at the door staring after him. Such people don't grow on every bush, she said. And that is the story of stone soup. Now, when I was growing up, the story of stone soup was that the whole village, one family added a potato and another family added a carrot and whatnot. But this is the story I could find. So every time I make soup, I throw a little bit of this and that in there, and I think I'm making stone soup just without the stone. So why don't you see if your mom will help you make stone soup? You start with a little stone, and you wash it, of course, and then you put it in the pot, and then what I do is I just take a couple of vegetables of every kind of vegetable I have in my fridge, cut them up, throw them in there, a little onion, a little olive oil, a little salt and pepper, raise the heat on it a little bit, and then turn off the heat and cover it, and an hour later you have delicious soup. But don't eat the stone. All right. Good night, everybody. Hope you sleep tight. Bye.